Captain Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the command bunker and felt the vibrations of another enemy bombardment shake the ground above. Dust rained down from the reinforced ceiling as explosions thundered across the surface of Kepler 442b, the colony world that had been humanity's proudest achievement just 3 months ago. "Status report," she called out to her communications officer, Lieutenant Rodriguez, whose fingers danced across holographic displays that flickered with each nearby impact. "All surface installations are either destroyed or under heavy fire. Captain, we've got maybe 200 civilians left in the underground shelters, and 43 military personnel still combat-ready." Rodriguez's voice carried the exhaustion they all felt after weeks of constant fighting. Sarah nodded grimly. The hegemony had arrived without warning, their massive dreadnoughts emerging from hyperspace like dark angels of destruction. The alien alliance consisted of 7 different species, each more technologically advanced than humanity, and they had declared human expansion into this sector of the galaxy to be an unacceptable threat to their established order. "What about the other colonies?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "New Geneva fell yesterday. Prometheus Station went dark 2 days ago. We're receiving scattered transmissions from the outer settlements, but..." Rodriguez trailed off, unable to voice what they all knew. Humanity's colonial empire was crumbling, and Kepler 442b might be the last holdout. Sergeant Major Jackson emerged from the tunnel that led to the deeper bunkers, his weathered face grim. "Ma'am, the civilians are asking questions. They want to know if evacuation ships are coming." Sarah felt the weight of command settle heavier on her shoulders. She was 34 years old, the youngest captain in the Colonial Defense Force, and she had never expected to be the last military commander defending humanity's future. The evacuation ships weren't coming. Earth's fleet was either destroyed or fighting desperately to protect the homeworld itself. "Tell them we're holding the line," she said finally. "Tell them help is on the way." Jackson's eyes met hers, and she saw her own knowledge reflected there. They both knew it was a lie. But sometimes lies were all that kept people from giving up entirely. A new voice crackled through the communications array, speaking in the harsh, clicking language of the Zephyrian Empire, the hegemony's dominant species. Rodriguez quickly activated the translation protocol. "Human defenders, this is War Commander Thok Moore of the Hegemony First Fleet. Your resistance has been noted and deemed admirable for such a primitive species. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Continue fighting, and we will ensure your suffering lasts for cycles." Sarah stepped forward and activated the response channel. "War Commander Thok Moore. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Colonial Defense Force. Here's my counteroffer. Go straight to hell." She cut the transmission and turned to find every pair of eyes in the command center focused on her. These men and women had followed her through 3 weeks of impossible odds, trusting her leadership even as their world literally crumbled around them. "All right, people, listen up," Sarah announced. "I'm not going to lie to you. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from any hope of reinforcement. The aliens up there have technology that makes our best weapons look like stone knives. By every military textbook ever written, we should have surrendered days ago." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But here's what those textbooks don't account for. They don't understand what makes humans different. Every species in that hegemony conquered worlds through superior firepower and advanced technology. They've never faced anyone who refused to stay down when logic said they should." Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from her console. "Captain, I'm detecting movement in the Eastern Tunnel Complex. Looks like they're trying to infiltrate through the old mining shafts." Sarah felt a grim smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "Perfect. Jackson, how many of those mining charges do we have left?" "About 30 pounds of concentrated explosive, ma'am. Not enough to damage their main ships. But more than enough to give them a surprise they won't forget. Rodriguez, I need you to access the colony's industrial database. Find me everything we know about human mining operations, construction techniques, and materials science." "Ma'am?" Rodriguez looked confused. "The aliens think they understand us because they've seen our military technology. They've analyzed our weapons, our ships, our standard tactics, but they've never seen what humans can do when we stop following the rules and start improvising. Sarah moved to the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities that no military academy had ever taught. Every species develops along predictable lines. They master energy weapons, then shields, then faster-than-light travel. They build their societies around honor codes and established hierarchies. But humans? We've always been the species that looks at the impossible and asks, what if we try it anyway? What? The bunker shook again as another bombardment struck the surface. This time, however, Sarah didn't see it as just destruction. She saw opportunity. Jackson, I need you to gather every able-bodied person in this facility, civilians included. We're going to do something so completely insane that even if the aliens figure out what we're planning, they won't believe we're actually stupid enough to try it. What exactly are we planning, ma'am? Jackson asked. Sarah's smile widened. We're going to take the fight to them, all the way to their command ship. The silence in the command center was deafening. Finally, Rodriguez spoke up. Captain, with respect, their command ship is in orbit. We don't have any functional aircraft, let alone spacecraft capable of reaching. Who said anything about aircraft? Sarah interrupted. Rodriguez, how deep do those mining shafts go? The deepest ones extend nearly 4 kilometers into the planet's crust. The miners were following a particularly rich vein of rare earth elements when the attack began. And what's the planet's rotational period? 26 standard hours, ma'am. Sarah nodded, pieces of an impossible plan falling into place in her mind. The hegemony has been bombarding us for 3 weeks. They've established predictable patterns, predictable orbits. They think they're hunting rats in a hole, so they've gotten comfortable. Comfortable enough to make mistakes. She turned to address the entire room. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to turn this entire planet into a weapon. Not the surface, not our remaining equipment, but the planet itself. We're going to use physics, geology, and pure human stubbornness to launch an attack that no alien strategist has ever imagined. Lieutenant Rodriguez's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. The mining charges. You're talking about creating artificial geological instability. But Captain, the energy requirements alone. That's where human creativity comes in, Sarah said. We don't need to power it ourselves. We just need to redirect energy that already exists. The planet's core, tidal forces, rotational momentum. The aliens have been kind enough to provide additional energy with their bombardments. Sergeant Major Jackson leaned forward, his tactical mind engaging with the possibilities. It would take precise timing, perfect calculations, and more luck than any sane person should count on. 2024. Good thing we stopped being sane about 2 weeks ago, Sarah replied. Jackson, I need you to organize teams to map every tunnel, every geological fault line, every structural weakness we can find. Rodriguez, start calculating orbital mechanics. I want to know exactly where their command ship will be at any given moment for the next 72 hours. As her officers began moving with renewed purpose, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope, not the desperate hope of rescue or survival, but the fierce hope that came from having a plan, no matter how insane. The hegemony thought they were dealing with a typical species that would eventually see reason and surrender. They had no idea they were about to face the one thing that had allowed humans to spread across the galaxy in the first place. The absolute refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. Hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Teams of civilians and soldiers worked together, mapping the underground network that honeycombed the planet's crust. Engineers calculated stress points and load-bearing factors. Communications specialists tracked the movement of the alien fleet with obsessive precision. Sarah found herself in the deepest part of the mining complex, 4 kilometers below the surface, where the air was hot and thick with the smell of excavated rock. Here, surrounded by the evidence of human determination to dig deeper, reach further, and extract value from the most unlikely places, she felt the truth of what they were attempting. Captain, called Dr. Elizabeth Hartley, the colony's chief geologist who had volunteered to help with the calculations. I've been running the numbers, and I think this might actually work. The planet's crust is more unstable than we initially realized. The mining operations created a network of controlled weak points, and with the right application of force, we can create a chain reaction, Sarah finished. How big? Dr. Hartley's face was pale in the artificial light. If we're correct, and if we time everything perfectly, we could trigger a localized tectonic event powerful enough to launch several thousand tons of material into low orbit at precisely the right moment. Several thousand tons of rock and metal traveling at orbital velocity, Sarah mused. That should get their attention. Captain, it could also destabilize the entire planetary surface. We might not survive the attempt. Sarah looked around at the determined faces surrounding her. These were people who had spent months carving civilization out of an alien world, who had built homes and lives in a place that had never known human footsteps. They understood better than anyone that sometimes survival meant being willing to risk everything. Dr. Hartley, in your professional opinion, what are our chances of success? The geologist was quiet for a long moment. Mathematically? Less than 3%. But then again, the mathematical probability of humans successfully colonizing this planet in the first place was less than 1%. Sarah nodded. And yet here we are. All right, people. Let's show the galaxy what 3% determination looks like when it's backed by 100% human stubbornness. As teams dispersed to begin the most ambitious and desperate engineering project in human history, Sarah remained in the depths of the mine for a moment longer. She thought about the children in the shelters above, about the future that hung in the balance, about the message they were about to send to every species in the galaxy. The hegemony had come expecting to crush another primitive civilization. Instead, they were about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology or their military might. It had always been their absolute refusal to surrender, their willingness to attempt the impossible, and their talent for finding ways to win even when victory seemed mathematically impossible. The transformation from last stand to triumph was about to begin, and it would start with humans doing what they had always done best, taking the rules of engagement and rewriting them entirely. 36 hours into the most audacious engineering project in human history, Captain Sarah Chen stood in what had once been the colony's central processing facility and watched her people perform miracles with scrap metal and determination. The facility had been converted into a command center for their impossible plan, with holographic displays showing real-time calculations of planetary rotation, orbital mechanics, and geological stress patterns. Jackson, report, Sarah called out as her sergeant major emerged from a tunnel, covered in rock dust and grinning despite their circumstances. Charges are set at all primary stress points, Captain. Dr. Hartley's team has identified 12 key locations where we can create maximum geological impact. The civilians have been incredible. We've got mining foremen working alongside retired engineers, and they're solving problems that should require weeks of computer modeling. 1. Sarah nodded, feeling a surge of pride in her species. When faced with impossible odds, humans didn't just adapt. They excelled. The past day and a half had seen innovations that would have taken months under normal circumstances, born from the desperate creativity that emerged when survival was on the line. Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from her station, her face illuminated by streams of data. Captain, I've got good news and concerning news. The good news is that our tracking of the hegemony fleet confirms they're maintaining predictable orbital patterns. War Commander Thakmor's flagship will be in optimal position in approximately 18 hours. And the concerning news? They're starting to take notice of our activity. Long-range sensors are detecting increased seismic activity from our preparation work. It's possible they'll realize what we're attempting before we're ready. Sarah considered this. The hegemony had been fighting primitive species for so long that they probably couldn't conceive of what the humans were actually planning. Still, underestimating the enemy had gotten humanity into this situation in the first place. How long until we're ready to execute? Dr. Hartley approached, her tablet showing complex geological models. We need at least 12 more hours to ensure the charge placement will create the precise sequence of tectonic shifts. Any less? and we risk the energy dissipating harmlessly into the planet's crust. Then we buy ourselves 12 hours, Sarah decided. Rodriguez, open a channel to the Hegemony flagship. Within moments, the harsh features of War Commander Thakmor appeared on the main display. The Zephyrian's scaled face showed the arrogant confidence of a predator who had cornered his prey. Behind him, Sarah could see the gleaming bridge of the most advanced warship humanity had ever encountered. The human captain chooses to speak again, Thakmor said, his translated voice dripping with condescension. Have you finally accepted the futility of your resistance? Actually, I wanted to make you an offer, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the audacity of what she was about to propose. Single combat. Your best warrior against mine. Winner takes the planet. The silence on the bridge of the Hegemony flagship was so complete that Sarah could almost hear the alien crew processing this unexpected development. Finally, Thakmor's distinctive laugh, a sound like grinding metal, filled the communication channel. You challenge the Hegemony to individual combat? Your species continues to surprise with its primitive thinking. Primitive thinking that's kept you fighting us for 3 weeks when you expected to conquer us in 3 hours, Sarah pointed out. Unless, of course, the mighty Hegemony is afraid of a single human? Free. She saw the immediate reaction in Thakmor's eyes. Like most warrior species, the Zephyrians had deep-seated concepts of honor and martial pride. The suggestion that they might fear anyone, especially a human, struck at the core of their identity. Fear? Thakmor hissed. The Hegemony fears nothing, least of all your pathetic species. Very well, human. I will honor your request for single combat, if only to demonstrate the vast difference between our peoples. Choose your warrior. Sarah stepped forward into full view of the communication pickup. You're looking at her. This time, the silence stretched even longer. When Thakmor spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine confusion. You? A female of your species? Problem with that? Sarah asked mildly. Among the Zephyrian Empire, females are protected as the bearers of future generations. They do not engage in combat. Well, that's your first mistake in understanding humans, Sarah replied. We've never believed that half our species should be kept out of the fight. It's one of the reasons we've survived as long as we have. She could see the alien commander struggling with concepts that had no parallel in his culture. The Hegemony species had all developed along similar lines, with rigid hierarchies and clearly defined roles. The idea that humans might organize their society differently was clearly difficult for him to process. Very well, Thakmor said finally. I will face you myself. The terms are simple. Single combat. No weapons beyond what each warrior can carry. Victory achieved by death or surrender of the opponent. When I defeat you, your remaining people will surrender immediately. And when I defeat you, Sarah countered, your fleet withdraws from this system and leaves humanity alone. Agreed. I will transport to your location in 1 hour. The communication ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Finally, Jackson found his voice. Captain, with respect, what the hell are you thinking? That alien is probably twice your size and strength. With combat training we can't even imagine. Sarah turned to face her people, seeing the concern and confusion in their faces. I'm thinking that we just bought ourselves exactly the time we need. Plus, I'm going to teach War Commander Thakmor something about human nature that he's never learned. Ma'am? Jackson, the Hegemony thinks they understand combat because they're bigger and stronger than us. They think they understand war because their technology is more advanced. But there's one type of fighting they've never encountered. Because every species they've conquered so far has thought the same way they do. Dr. Hartley stepped forward. Captain, I'm not a military strategist. But even I can see that direct physical combat plays to all of his advantages. You're essentially agreeing to fight by his rules. Am I? Sarah asked, moving to the tactical display. Rodriguez, show me everything we know about Zephyrian physiology, psychology, and combat doctrine. As data flowed across the screens, Sarah studied the information with the intensity of someone whose life depended on finding a crucial detail. The Zephyrians were indeed larger and stronger than humans, with enhanced reflexes and natural armor plating. Their combat training emphasized honor, direct confrontation, and the demonstration of superior force. "There," Sarah said, pointing to a section of psychological analysis. Zephyrian culture is built around the concept of hierarchical dominance. Combat is seen as a way of establishing one's place in the social order. They fight to prove superiority, not necessarily to achieve victory. "I'm not sure I see the difference," Jackson admitted. "The difference is everything," Sarah explained. "When humans fight, we fight to win. We don't care about looking honorable or proving we're stronger. We care about surviving and protecting what matters to us. That gives us options that honor-bound species never consider." She moved to a display showing the mining facility's layout. "I'm not going to fight War Commander Thokmor by his rules. I'm going to fight him by human rules. Which means using every advantage I can find, exploiting every weakness he has, and doing whatever it takes to achieve victory." "But Captain," Rodriguez protested, "even with tactical advantages, the physical disparity will only matter if I let him get close enough to use it," Sarah finished. "Rodriguez, I need you to calculate something for me. Based on Zephyrian physiology and their homeworld's gravity, what would be the effects of sudden changes in atmospheric pressure, temperature, or environmental conditions?" As her communications officer began working on the calculations, Sarah turned her attention to the preparations that were already underway. The mining facility had multiple levels, complex ventilation systems, and industrial equipment that could be repurposed in ways the Zephyrian commander would never expect. "Dr. Hartley, how are our geological preparations progressing?" "On schedule, Captain. We'll be ready to initiate the sequence in approximately 11 hours. "Perfect. That gives me plenty of time to teach our alien friend a lesson about human adaptability." The next hour passed quickly as Sarah made her preparations. She studied the facility's layout, tested equipment, and reviewed everything known about Zephyrian combat capabilities. When the transport beam announced the arrival of War Commander Thokmor, she was ready. The alien commander materialized in the facility's central chamber, a space that had once housed massive ore processing equipment. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scaled hide gleaming under the artificial lights, carrying what appeared to be a ceremonial blade that looked more like a small sword in his massive hands. "Human Captain," he growled, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, without the need for translation equipment. "You seem smaller than your transmissions suggested." "Funny," Sarah replied from her position on an elevated platform. "You seem exactly as arrogant as I expected." Thokmor's head turned, tracking her voice, and Sarah saw the moment he realized she wasn't standing on the chamber floor waiting for a traditional duel. Instead, she had positioned herself at the control station for the facility's environmental systems. "You hide from honorable combat?" he demanded. "I use every advantage available to protect my people," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. One that your species apparently never learned." She activated the first sequence of environmental controls. Suddenly, the chamber was flooded with superheated steam from the facility's geothermal systems. The effect on the Zephyrian was immediate and dramatic. His movements became sluggish as his cold-blooded physiology struggled to cope with the rapid temperature change. "Clever," Thokmor admitted, though his voice carried a note of grudging respect rather than anger. "But such tricks will only delay the inevitable." He began moving toward the platform where Sarah stood. But she was already implementing the next phase of her plan. Industrial mining equipment, controlled remotely, began creating obstacles and barriers throughout the chamber. Heavy machinery moved into position, creating a maze that would force the alien commander to navigate on human terms. "You spoke of the futility of resistance," Sarah called out as she moved through passages designed for human-sized workers, passages too small for her opponent to follow. "But humans have always specialized in making the impossible possible. We've spent our entire evolutionary history as the smaller, weaker species. We learned to survive by being smarter, more adaptable, and more creative than anything hunting us." Thokmor roared his frustration as he attempted to pursue her through the facility, his larger size becoming a liability in the confined spaces. Sarah had turned the entire mining complex into her weapon, using her knowledge of its systems to control the environment of their conflict. "Stand and fight with honor," he demanded. "Honor is a luxury for species that can afford it," Sarah replied, activating another system that filled certain corridors with dense fog from the facility's coolant systems. "Humans fight to win. That's why we've survived this long against impossible odds." The duel continued for nearly an hour, with Sarah using every system, every passage, and every piece of equipment in the facility to maintain her advantage. She struck when she could, using modified mining tools and environmental hazards to wear down her opponent, then disappeared back into the maze of tunnels and maintenance shafts when he attempted to retaliate. Finally, as the alien commander struggled with exhaustion and disorientation from the constantly changing environmental conditions, Sarah made her final move. Using the facility's magnetic ore separation system, she trapped Thakmor in a localized magnetic field that held his metallic weapons and armor components immobile. Standing before the helpless alien commander, Sarah felt no sense of triumph. Instead, she felt the weight of representing her entire species in this moment. "You could kill me now," Thakmor said, his voice carrying a mixture of defeat and confusion. "Why do you hesitate?" "Because killing you won't save my people," Sarah replied. "But maybe teaching you something will." She deactivated the magnetic field and stepped back, allowing the alien to regain his freedom. "War Commander, your people have conquered dozens of species across the galaxy. How many of them surprised you? How many fought in ways you didn't expect?" Thakmor was slow to answer, his tactical mind processing what had just occurred. "None. They all fought, as we expected, with honor, following the established rules of warfare. And how many of them are still free?" The silence stretched between them, as the implications of her question sank in. Finally, Thakmor spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "What are you saying, human?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time the hegemony learned something new about strength. True strength isn't about having the biggest weapons or the most advanced technology. It's about refusing to give up when everything seems hopeless. It's about finding ways to win when victory should be impossible." Sarah gestured toward the displays showing her people's preparations. "In 10 hours, this planet is going to do something that no planet in the history of galactic warfare has ever done. Not because we have superior technology, but because humans have always excelled at taking impossible situations and finding ways to turn them to our advantage." As understanding dawned in the alien commander's eyes, Sarah realized that their desperate last stand was about to become something much more significant. It was about to become the moment humanity announced to the galaxy that the rules of conquest had just changed forever. 10 hours after her unconventional victory over War Commander Thakmor, Captain Sarah Chen stood in the deepest command bunker on Kepler 442b, watching the final countdown to humanity's most desperate gambit. The alien commander stood beside her, his massive frame hunched slightly as he studied the displays showing seismic activity across the planet's surface. "Your people are truly prepared to destroy their own world rather than surrender?" Thakmor asked, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. "We're not destroying our world," Sarah corrected, her fingers dancing across the control interface as she made final adjustments to their impossible plan. "We're transforming it." "There's a difference." Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from her station, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air of the bunker. "All teams report ready, Captain. Charges are armed, geological stress points are mapped, and orbital calculations are confirmed. We have a 12-minute window when the hegemony flagship will be in optimal position." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders one final time. Around the command center, her remaining personnel worked with the focused intensity of people who knew that the next few minutes would determine the fate of humanity's expansion into the galaxy. "Dr. Hartley, final status on the geological projections?" The colony's chief geologist stepped forward, her tablet displaying complex models of underground stress patterns. "Captain, we've identified a network of natural fault lines that connect to our mining shafts. If we trigger the charges in the correct sequence, we can create a controlled chain reaction that will propagate through the planet's crust. The energy will be directed upward through the weakest points in the geological structure." "English, Doctor," Sergeant Major Jackson, called out from his position at the tactical display. Dr. Hartley smiled grimly. "We're going to turn the entire planet into a railgun, Sergeant. A railgun that fires rocks the size of buildings at near orbital velocity." Throckmore's scaled head turned sharply toward the human geologist. "That is, mathematically impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the output of most stellar bodies. Under normal circumstances, yes," Sarah agreed. "But we're not using our own energy. We're redirecting energy that already exists. Planetary rotation, tidal forces, gravitational stress, and the kinetic energy your own bombardments have been adding to the system for the past 3 weeks." She moved to the main display, which showed a 3-dimensional model of the planet with thousands of calculations streaming across its surface. Humans have always been good at finding unconventional solutions to impossible problems. When we first started exploring space, everyone said we'd never develop faster than light travel because we didn't understand the fundamental physics. So we found ways to work around those limitations. "The Alcubierre drive," Throckmore said, his voice thoughtful. "Your species achieved interstellar travel by manipulating space-time itself, rather than trying to exceed light speed directly." "Exactly. And when they told us we could never establish successful colonies because we lacked the technology to terraform entire worlds, we found ways to adapt ourselves and our settlements to work with existing conditions instead." Sarah gestured toward the data streams flowing across the displays. "Every species in your hegemony advanced by developing better weapons, stronger shields, more powerful engines. You followed the logical progression of technological development. But humans have always been the species that looked at the established rules and asked, what if we just ignore those rules entirely?" The countdown timer reached 5 minutes, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Around the command center, her people made final preparations with the calm efficiency of professionals who had long since moved beyond fear into the realm of determined acceptance. "All stations, this is Captain Chen," she announced over the facility's communication system. "In 4 minutes, we're going to attempt something that has never been done in the history of galactic warfare. We're going to show the hegemony and every other species watching this conflict that humanity doesn't just fight wars. We redefine what war itself means." She paused, looking around at the faces of the men and women who had followed her through weeks of impossible odds. "Some of you are soldiers. Some are civilians. Some are engineers, miners, teachers, and farmers. But today, you're all something else. Today, you're the people who refuse to let humanity go quietly into extinction." Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice cut through the moment. 2 minutes, Captain. Hegemony flagship is moving into position." Sarah turned to Throckmore, who had been watching the human preparations with the fascination of a warrior encountering an entirely new form of combat. "War Commander, I'm going to give you a choice. Your transport beam is still functional. You can return to your ship and experience what's about to happen from their perspective, or you can stay here and see how humans really fight when everything is on the line." The alien commander was silent for a long moment, his predator's eyes studying the displays, showing the complex sequence of geological events they were about to trigger. "I have spent my entire career conquering species that fought according to predictable patterns. I find myself curious about what happens when that predictability is abandoned." "Then welcome to Human Warfare 101, Sarah said with a grim smile. "First lesson: never assume anything is impossible. Rodriguez, begin the sequence." The first charges detonated 4 kilometers below the planet's surface. Their explosions carefully timed to trigger a specific pattern of geological stress. The effects were immediate and dramatic. Seismic monitoring stations across the bunker registered massive energy releases as fault lines that had been stable for millennia suddenly shifted. "Sequence 1 complete," Dr. Hartley announced. "Stress propagation is following projected patterns. Energy is building in the primary focal points." Sarah watched the displays as the planet itself became her weapon. Underground, a network of controlled geological instability spread through the mining tunnels and natural fault systems, building toward a crescendo that would reshape the surface above. "Sequence 2, initiate," Sarah commanded. The The second wave of explosions triggered deeper in the planet's crust, using the mining network to direct unprecedented amounts of geological energy toward specific surface locations. The vibrations could be felt even in their heavily reinforced bunker, a constant rumbling that seemed to come from the very bones of the world. Throckmore braced himself against the command console as the facility shook around them. Your people are triggering controlled seismic events with surgical precision. How is this level of geological manipulation possible? Because humans have been mining, digging, and reshaping worlds for our entire evolutionary history, Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off the countdown timer. We understand planetary geology not as scientists, but as people who've spent millennia pulling resources out of the ground and building our civilizations on foundations we carved from bedrock. 30 seconds to optimal orbital position, Rodriguez announced. Sarah's hand hovered over the final control sequence. Around her, the command center had fallen silent except for the constant rumble of geological activity and the steady countdown of the orbital tracking system. Hegemony flagship is in position, Rodriguez said, her voice tight with concentration. Final sequence, initiate, Sarah commanded. The last series of charges detonated in perfect synchronization across the planet's surface, triggering a chain reaction that had been building for the past several minutes. Underground stress that had been carefully directed and focused suddenly found release through natural channels that humans had mapped and modified. The effect was beyond anything in the recorded history of warfare. Massive sections of the planet's surface shifted as geological energy, equivalent to thousands of nuclear weapons, was channeled through precise exit points. Rock formations the size of city blocks were launched into the sky with the velocity of artillery shells. Primary launch successful, Dr. Hartley shouted over the rumbling chaos. Trajectory calculations confirm impact with the Hegemony flagship in 18 seconds. On the main display, they watched as several thousand tons of planetary material streaked through the atmosphere toward the alien command ship. The Hegemony vessels, designed to withstand energy weapons and conventional explosives, had no defense against the kinetic impact of an entire mountain launched at near-orbital velocity. The flagship's shields flared brilliantly as they attempted to deflect the incoming projectiles, but the mass and velocity involved overwhelmed their defensive systems completely. The first impacts struck the vessel's hull with the force of meteorites, punching through advanced armor plating as if it were paper. Direct hits on the command ship, Rodriguez reported, her voice filled with disbelief. Their main engines are offline, weapons systems are down, and they're venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. Sarah watched as the most advanced warship in the Hegemony fleet was systematically destroyed by technology that was older than civilization itself. Rocks thrown very, very hard, but the attack was far from over. The geological chain reaction they had triggered was still propagating through the planet's crust, and secondary launch points across the surface began hurling additional projectiles toward the other Hegemony vessels. Ships that had seemed untouchable moments before found themselves under assault from a form of attack that existed outside their tactical doctrine. Impossible, Throckmore whispered, staring at the displays showing his fleet under bombardment from the planet itself. No species has ever weaponized an entire world. No species has ever needed to, Sarah replied. The Hegemony has been conquering civilizations that developed along the same technological lines you did. They built bigger ships, stronger shields, more powerful weapons, but they never faced anyone desperate enough and creative enough to turn physics itself into a weapon. The bombardment continued for nearly 10 minutes, as the geological chain reaction worked its way through the prepared network of fault lines and mining tunnels. When it finally ended, the Hegemony fleet had been reduced to scattered debris and a few heavily damaged vessels attempting to limp away from the system. Status report, Sarah called out into the sudden silence. Long-range sensors show 17 Hegemony ships destroyed or disabled, Rodriguez announced. The surviving vessels are broadcasting retreat signals and moving out of the system at maximum speed. Sarah felt her legs give out as the adrenaline that had sustained her for the past hours suddenly drained away. She found herself sitting on the floor of the command center, surrounded by her people who were celebrating with the quiet intensity of those who had just achieved the impossible. Throckmore knelt beside her, his alien features showing an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Captain Chen, What your species accomplished today will change the balance of power in this galaxy. The hegemony has never faced defeat like this. Good, Sarah said, finding the strength to stand again. Maybe it's time the galaxy learned that there's more than one way to be strong. She moved to the communication console and opened a channel to the surviving hegemony vessels. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Colonial Defense Force. Tell your leaders that humanity is officially withdrawing from the surrender they demanded. Tell them that any future aggression against human colonies will be met with responses they haven't imagined yet. The reply came from one of the retreating ships, the voice filled with the shock of a predator who had discovered he was actually prey. Message received. Human Captain. The hegemony will consider new terms of engagement. As the alien ships disappeared into hyperspace, Sarah looked around at her people. They had started this day as the last defenders of a doomed colony. They were ending it as the architects of humanity's most significant military victory. Captain, Rodriguez said, her voice filled with wonder. We're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Word of what happened here is spreading to every human colony, every alien civilization, every corner of known space. Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. Humanity had just announced to the galaxy that the rules of conquest had changed. They had demonstrated that technological superiority and military might could be overcome by creativity, desperation, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The day humanity transformed a last stand into triumph had begun with impossible odds and ended with impossible victory. But more than that, it had shown the galaxy something that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. Sometimes, the greatest strength wasn't having the biggest weapons or the most advanced technology. Sometimes, the greatest strength was being human enough to look at the impossible and find a way to make it work anyway. In the years that followed, military academies across the galaxy would study the Battle of Kepler 442b as the moment when human tactical doctrine rewrote the fundamental assumptions of interstellar warfare. But for Sarah Chen and her people, it would always be remembered as the day they discovered that the most powerful weapon in the universe was the human refusal to give up. The hegemony had come to Kepler 442b expecting to crush another primitive civilization. Instead, they had encountered something far more dangerous than any advanced weapon or defensive technology. They had encountered human ingenuity backed by the desperate courage of people fighting for their survival and their future. And they had learned, too late, that sometimes the most primitive species can be the most dangerous of all.